Listen to the JT Sports Podcast on all podcasting platforms and leave a 5-star review.
Ole Miss got the win at home against Kentucky, 22-19. Now, this game pretty much went the way I expected it to. I picked Ole Miss to win this game, and there was a good amount of concern that I had about Ole Miss going into this matchup, because even though I picked them to win this game, I still wasn't really confident about them winning this game, because I didn't know if Jackson Dart would play good enough for Ole Miss to get the win if the ground game wasn't there. However, luckily enough, the rushing game for Ole Miss was there, and true freshman running back Quinshon Judkins was absolutely unstoppable. He had 15 carries for 106 rushing yards, 7.1 yards per attempt, and he had a touchdown as well. Ole Miss as a team had 186 rushing yards, and I think the story of this game definitely has to be the fact that the special teams for Kentucky, at least when it came to the field goal kicking, costed them this game. I think field goal kicking definitely was 90% of the reason why Kentucky lost. They left too many points on the field. And, you know, if I was a head coach and I had to coach a bad team, I would go up to the general manager, or if I was a college head coach, I would go to the transfer portal and at least try to get me a good quarterback and a good kicker. Because the difference between you having a losing season and a winning season, despite not having a talented roster, is the quarterback position and field goal kicking. And oftentimes, the deciding factor and determining who wins one possession games are normally the kickers and how good the quarterback play is down the stretch. So for Ole Miss in this game, I think that Jackson Dart wasn't really asked to do all that much. Now, he did have to put the ball in the air a good bunch, and I think that he played pretty decent. Now, he did have an interception before halftime, and when Lane Kiffin was interviewed going into the locker room, he definitely was annoyed about it, because Ole Miss definitely was starting to get into a little bit of a groove, and that interception definitely did kind of ruin the momentum that they had going in. However, outside of that, I felt like he had a pretty decent outing. He was averaging 14.2 yards per pass. These receivers were really good. So offensively for Ole Miss, still a lot of things that they have to work on, that they have to clean up. Jackson Dart definitely still has to continue to improve, and Lane Kiffin definitely alluded to that after the game. However, I think the defense definitely really stepped up. This defense came to play. They had 3 sacks, 9 tackles for loss, and 2 big takeaways, which they were 2 fumbles that they had on Kentucky quarterback Will Levis. And that's another thing when you look at Kentucky in this game. One of the concerns that I had about Kentucky was, what if Will Levis has the ball in his hands late in the game? Can he take care of the football? Because although Will Levis is really talented, he is prone to being a little bit reckless at critical moments in games. And I felt like in this matchup for Kentucky, unless the run game was really going, in a one-possession game late in the fourth quarter, I don't really want Will Levis having to have the ball in his hands too much, because then that's when he may try to do too much and then cost you. And that's what happened with Kentucky. Now, luckily enough, their defense bailed them out one time. He gave it up. But then he gave it up again, and that pretty much was the ball game, and it sealed the win for Ole Miss. And another thing that many people were talking about when it came to Kentucky's side was they were saying that Man, the fact that C-Rod is coming back is going to help this offense out because now the run game is going to be there, which is something that Kentucky hasn't had a lot of success so far doing this season. And C-Rod had a okay game. He had 19 carries, 72 yards, a touchdown. However, he averaged 3.8 yards per attempt. And the team as a whole averaged 2.9 yards per carry. And the problem with Kentucky isn't running back. Definitely getting C-Rod helps you. But the problem was the offensive line. And the offensive line was a problem again in this game. They gave up 3 sacks. You were giving up too many plays behind the line. It's just this offensive line for Kentucky is playing at the worst level that I've seen it play ever. I mean, this is probably the worst offensive line that Kentucky has had in a decade. When's the last time you can say that Coach Stoops had a bad offensive line at Kentucky? Rarely ever. So this offensive line really hurt Kentucky in this game. Because you look at Ole Miss, on the other hand, people were saying, man, JT, Ole Miss isn't going to have a lot of success running the football because they haven't faced a team that had the kind of run defense that Kentucky had. And the thing with Kentucky's run defense was that on paper, it looked good. But remember, if you go back and you remember that Florida game, Florida had a lot of success running the football on the ground against Kentucky. However, they just chose to throw the football a little bit more instead of continuing to run the football. And that's what hurt them. However, with Ole Miss, they didn't shy away from that. Ole Miss kept running the football. And guess what? Kentucky simply could not stop it. And the Ole Miss offensive line is really good. Really good. So you look at Ole Miss moving forward, they remain unbeaten. It's going to be really interesting to see how far this team can go because I don't think Ole Miss is playing their best football yet. So you look at the way their schedule's lined up, I think that Ole Miss has a path that maybe they could end up having another double-digit winning season. Because this team has a good defense. They're good when it comes to getting after the quarterback. They can force turnovers. You got a really good run game. And I think that eventually Jackson Dart and this passing game are going to get it figured out. I think that eventually Lane Kiffin is going to have Jackson Dart playing at a way more consistent and efficient level. And he definitely has improved over the last couple of weeks. He definitely is way better now compared to where he was when we first saw him, especially during the spring. So I think that Jackson Dart definitely is improving, and it is fair to expect him to continue to step up his play eventually. And it's going to happen down the stretch. I think this Ole Miss team is a little scary. And the whole entire SEC West, the best teams in this division right now aren't the teams that we may have thought would have been the best teams at this moment prior to the season starting. And we're going to talk about that on a later episode of the podcast later on during this week.